So, socialists, I would like to introduce you to my friend Wayne Laberta, who is a wonderful designer and friend, and he performs drag as the very talented Maxie. We are going to talk to Wayne today about his whole process sewing and creating costumes for Maxie, and how he goes about doing all that stuff. So, welcome! Hello!
Thank you.
So, Wayne, first off, what are your pronouns?
As Wayne, I go by he, him.
Mm-hmm.
As Maxie, generally she, her. But to be honest, if we get it mixed up or twisted a little bit, it's not a big deal either way.
Okay, cool. How do you want me to talk about you versus Maxie? Like, should I refer to you performing as her, or how do you want me to talk about that?
Um, it's funny because I feel like at times they're separate entities, but also at times they're one and the same.
Yeah.
So, honestly, no offense either way. I mean, you can refer to her as a separate person,
Okay.
or as me. It's okay. We can roll with whatever
Okay.
comes out our mouths.
That sounds good. So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you start getting into drag in the first place?
Yeah, oh God, this is always scary when I start saying numbers, but I started doing Maxie when I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at it for 22, 23 years.
Wow.
Everyone can do the math there if they want to. But honestly, it started, I was going out to the bars and the clubs a little bit, being young and watching the shows, and I was always just mesmerized by, drag and the performers on stage. And one point in time, we were planning a party, and my friends said to me, they're like, I dare you to, do drag at the party. And I'm like, well, okay. It's like, how hard could it be, really?
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to try it, and that evening, Maxie was born. She performed a number at the party, and I was hooked ever since.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So how did you start creating clothing for her? Was this like, did you just buy stuff originally, or were you always making your own costumes?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, the late 90s, I certainly wasn't the same physique I am now, so I was able to buy a lot more things off the rack. I didn't have the sewing skills that I do now either,
Uh-huh.
but it is what spurred me to really start sewing and start, working on things. A lot of the performances would be based on things you saw celebrities wear,
Mm-hmm.
especially in music videos and that. You'd like to try and emulate or copy that look.
Uh-huh.
So oftentimes, you couldn't buy a music video look off the rack.
Right.
So you'd have to either manipulate something that was already out there,
Mm-hmm.
or make it from scratch. And so I started making a lot of costumes from scratch, taking the flat patterns and altering them to my shape and working through to create looks that were, unique from anything else that you'd see in stores.
Oh, that's awesome. So tell me about, did you go to school for design?
I did. I went to the University of Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
but my road to my degree was not a smooth, I didn't set sail and head off on a straight course.
Right.
When I left high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I liked to be creative. I knew I wanted to be in the design field, but I didn't really know what exactly that meant. I had explored architecture. I actually started going to the University of Minnesota as a graphic design student.
Mm-hmm.
But a year and a half in, I realized that was not for me. and that left me in a kind of a weird place of not really knowing where to turn and what to do. So I left school. I was doing drag part-time. I was a makeup artist part-time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting at the sewing machine and, talking to my mom on the phone and just being so upset with, like, where life was going and not having a lot of direction. And I remember saying to her, I'm like, Mom, why can't, like, a hobby or something you love be a career? And, it was that moment of just like, what is coming out of my mouth? Look at me sitting at a sewing machine, like altering patterns, making stuff. Like, why couldn't that be a career?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the research, and since I was already going to the University of Minnesota, or had been, they had an apparel design degree program. So I reapplied, and luckily, since all my credits were there, I already had a great base of credits established. and I went back to school for 3 years full time, and I graduated with an apparel design degree.
Ah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. So tell me about your career. You are designing men's activewear right now, is that right?
I am. My career has kind of spanned a wide variety of product categories. So I started in menswear almost immediately after college.
Uh-huh.
I went directly into a menswear assistant design position. I did sweaters, swim, outerwear, and then I began kind of bouncing around a little bit. I did young men's woven pants. I moved into women's leisure wear. I moved into women's outerwear.
Uh-huh.
I, not long after, did juniors, dresses, woven tops, and then kind of settled into denim for quite a while. I revamped multiple denim lines throughout my career at 3 different companies. I spent some time in New York, where I met you,
Right.
and our careers collided. But I did denim at a few different companies, and then I found myself a little burnt out on New York. I found myself burnt out on corporate life, and had decided it was time to make a radical change. And I packed up my belongings. I left New York City. I came back to Minneapolis, and I started doing some theater work. I did some theater costuming.
Cool.
I worked at a rather large theater here in Minneapolis doing wig and wardrobe changes during
Awesome.
shows.
That's so cool.
It was a very fun experience, but it also was a very high stress environment and a very high stress position. So after doing that for a while, I got a call from a company I used to work for, and they asked me if I would be interested in applying for a fabric trend and R&D position.
Oh, cool.
And so I did that. I did that for a few years, and then transitioned into men's activewear, and that's what I do presently.
That's awesome. So tell me, how is it designing for those separate categories, keeping your personal designing out of your work design work? I know, especially, like you have to do trend forecasting and all that stuff, and keeping an eye on what's going on in the world. So as you're looking at things, are you like, oh, that would be cool for Maxi? Or how do you keep the two things separate?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, men's activewear and Maxi are very different.
Right.
Probably couldn't be less related, which is great, because I really do enjoy having a reprieve from my work life, but still being creative. So, going down in the sewing room is sort of my escape place, and it's a great chance to recharge and sort of like channel those energies in a different way, so that I can go back to my regular job and feel, ready to attack the day or attack, another meeting.
Right.
Which is always the case. But certainly, I love the inspiration comes from all directions as far as Max is concerned. So like you brought up runway tears and that, I'm always looking at stuff and I'm like, oh, maybe that would be something interesting. Oh, put that in the bank. Set that aside for a later moment. But yeah, I like to keep them separate, but they definitely, influence.
Yeah. I don't see how there's a way that you could keep them entirely separate, especially if it's the same brain behind everything. So, question. You mentioned that you flat pattern everything for Maxi. So, do you have a block library? How have you developed all that stuff for her?
Yeah, well, Maxi is certainly a shape that is not her standard silhouette.
Yes, tell me about this. I really want to know about this.
Right? Maxi is, there's a lot of body modification that goes into it. When I have kind of created Maxi, and she's evolved over the years, her silhouette has also evolved quite a bit, and I like to think of her as almost more of a caricature of femininity, a celebration of all the things that I think are idealistic about being a woman, and kind of cartoonish in a way, but I also think what it does is it sort of makes a mockery of what we think of as the standards of beauty. Like how far can you go? How fake can it be? and yet still be mesmerizing and still be captivating.
That's an excellent way to put that. We have been talking over at the Socialists about things being gender neutral or removing gender from clothing at all. And then, working in apparel manufacturing, things are obviously designed for age, figure type, and biological sex, which is something totally different from gender. There's so many different genders, as we know. So it's really fascinating to, pardon me, be designing for yourself as a different sex, but totally reimagined into something completely different. The silhouettes are different. So what are Maxie's measurements? Out of curiosity.
Maxie's measurements are a bit extreme. I pad out about a double D breast, and then I have some pretty thick foam hip pads, and I corset. So at the end of the day, she ends up being about a 38 double D, plus or minus, depending. Waist is anywhere between 25 to 29 inches, and hip is generally around 42. I think lately the new padding I have might be more around a 44. So,
wow.
Those are measurements that you can't go to a store and find something off the rack that's going to work.
Right.
And underneath all that padding is still a man's body, and just inherently, there's certain things that I have that's not more of a feminine shape. So I've got really broad shoulders. I have straight, narrower hips. It's not necessarily things that are going to be accommodated on a regular off the rack situation when you're looking at costumes. So I do make all of my own patterns and all of my own costumes. Partially because I'm oftentimes looking for something a lot more special than I'm going to find in stores anyway, or something very specific that's in my head that I know I can create, and it's not worth the hunt.
Right.
So I work on, or I have a whole set of block patterns that I've created for her. So depending on the costume and the materials, if it's 4-way stretch, if it's non-stretch or 2-way stretch. If it's a leotard versus a dress, I've got a whole plethora of things to start from, so that my process of actually creating is obviously a little bit shorter because I'm not starting from scratch every year.
Right, exactly. So in that, I have two separate questions. So the first is, you made a video detailing about how to make your own hip pads for Maxie, and I want to know more about that. What do you use in your process? Can you talk us through a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been making hip pads and that for quite a long time. It's actually something I learned early on from other artists and performers backstage. When I started, YouTube was not really a thing, or it was in infancy stages, and so it wasn't a place where we went to learn new things and tools of the trade. You learned it from those around you and those that you're performing with. So I learned early on how to create a pair of hip pads, and so the ones I use, I decided this time around I would just pull them out.
Oh, cool!
So here is.
Oh, wow! Okay.
Back a little bit, so you can see it's kind of a large shape. This area sits about my natural waist, and then this comes down the thigh, and then this here wraps around my buttocks.
Oh, wow.
And then what I'll do to round out the back is I'll add a little butt pad.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So if you see the tutorial on making it with Maxie, I start with some 3-inch furniture foam. I have a general idea of the shape, but I do take a few key measurements and lay that out.
Okay.
And then I use a permanent marker to mark a few things and a good old-fashioned electric knife, and I start taping it down.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So when you're wearing those things, we had talked a little bit about this, how you're putting the padding inside of tights rather than making some kind of short situation, and then the breasts you're using a already existing bra? Okay.
Yeah, so, I don't have to quick change my body shape necessarily during a show. Like
Yeah.
the silhouette I create is the silhouette I wear all evening. So I don't have a separate garment that comes on and off to create my padding like you might use in theater. I think in theater they do that a lot. Where they'll create a separate garment. I think partly too that's just easier for the actor or the actress to get in and out of.
Right.
But for myself, I will put on a pair of dance tights. I will fit the foam pads in the place that I want them, get them situated, and then I'll put on another 3 or 4 pairs of dance tights, and that just helps smooth the silhouette, and it helps to, adjust the colors so that it looks like, my legs naturally, or I feel I always look a little muppety with that stuff on, but I think it does a pretty good job.
Right.
And then, on the chest, I do use, so I use a foam
cool.
pad. This is the larger one. And then that fits within a bra.
Cool.
That I use on top.
Awesome. How long does it take you to go from start to finish when you first start designing a look for Maxie?
When I start designing a look for Maxie, it can take, well, I'll say on average, I think about it the morning of a show. And I'll get busy in the morning, and I'll work all day, and I can typically finish by the time I have to leave the house to go get ready.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, and there's the power of your block library, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And knowing how to quickly get through things like, fit challenges and sewing. And then there's times when, obviously there's a little more love and time involved, so it can take me anywhere from a couple months to, a day.
Yeah.
Depending. Yeah.
Cool. How do you fit on yourself? Are you like me, like iPhone selfies in a mirror, or are you making a list of notes as you go, or do you have a helper that comes over, or, what do you do?
I wish I had a helper. I will say fitting is the biggest challenge. I like your idea of snapping selfies in the mirror. I have not thought of that. Typically what I will do is I will pad out. I will put on the garment, and then I'll look in the mirror and kind of, try not to do any huge movements that I know are going to alter fit in that, but I'll start to sort of try and pinch out little areas, take note of where it's not necessarily fitting the way I would like it to. I'll take it off, I'll make a few adjustments, I'll throw it on again, and so it is a little bit of that back and forth. Like I'll try it, I'll adjust it, I'll try it again, and if it needs further adjustments, once in a while my partner may be around and willing to help me out, so I'll have him do a little pinning or mark a few things, but generally I'm on my own, so it's a lot of that back and forth between the mirror and the sewing machine.
Yeah. Do you ever get trapped into overfitting? This is a big topic for us a lot of the time, and I have a rule of thumb that's like, don't make more than 5 corrections at a time. Do your top 5, and then, come back and reevaluate if you have more stuff, but try not to get, too in the weeds with it. Do you find yourself, creating any limits for yourself, or are you just like, let's get it perfect?
Yeah, well, I think, the block patterns I start with are built off of my measurements, so to be honest, a lot of the times I don't need a lot of alterations.
That's awesome.
But I'm not an absolute perfectionist. I realize when I go on that stage, I can mess with it a little bit to make it look the way I want to. So, if it's adding a belt to take it in where it didn't come in far enough, or corseting underneath where maybe it was a little too tight, I'll kind of act in the moment.
Yeah.
But I'll say in general, I try to make the adjustments that are necessary to get it as good as I can, and then there's just a few rules that I live by. There's always that pull lines direct you to the problem, and tight is not always right.
Tight is not always right. No. Thank you for saying that.
Those are 2 fit rules that I live by, and they generally help me very much.
Oh my goodness, yes, those rules are excellent. So, you sent me a photo of your sewing area. Talk to me about your machines. What's your favorite to work on? Do you have any tools that are like your go-to tried and trues?
Well, yeah, my sewing room, I have right now 4 different machines. The one I love is my Juki semi-professional. So it's only a straight stitch. It's a powerhouse.
That's awesome.
It's basically a industrial sewing machine in a portable case. So it's not attached to the table. The motor's inside. You can move it around like a domestic, but it's got the power and that of an industrial machine. So I love that one. And then I have a baby lock serger that I use quite often, especially with high stretch knits, and that I work with a lot. And then I have two domestics. So whenever I need a zigzag stitch or maybe something slightly more decorative, or just honestly the versatility, I'll use one of those machines.
Oh, that's awesome. So you mentioned also that you have been getting into corsets. So yeah, talk to me about that. Corsetry is fascinating.
I've always loved corsets. I think there's just something fascinating about them, and certainly when it comes to body modification, when you can take your body to such an extreme, it's just visually so amazing. It's so crazy.
It's like arresting when you see something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We won't get into whether or not they're healthy or good for you.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. We're talking about looks here today.
Other deal. But yeah, I learned to make corsets rather early on. Funny enough, I had a very good friend of mine early in my drag career who was a dominatrix here in Minneapolis.
Oh.
And so she wore corsets all the time. I think it's part of the reason I became so enamored by them. And instead of just wearing corsets to create a silhouette, they were obviously part of her costume. They were an exterior piece that was to be noticed and to be seen.
Right.
And so I wear corsets both ways. One to create a silhouette and a shape as more of a shaper undergarment, but then I also wear them quite often as a showpiece, and I love them. But corsets, ultimately, I say they're not hard to make. It's just a lot of pieces to keep track of. It is a lot of construction to work with, and then you just have to kind of consider at the end of the day, what do you want your corset to do? So a corset that's meant to really pull in a waist and create a really dramatic shape, you're probably going to want to use steel boning and really tough canvas inner linings and a full-on metal busk. But if it's something that is a little bit more relaxed, isn't really necessarily creating a strong silhouette, then plastic boning usually works really well. I'll do a zipper front as the closure instead of a traditional busk. I might make it so that when it closes, it's not actually taking in my waist as much, so it's more comfortable to wear. So a lot of things that I think about when I do it.
Yeah.
And I just recently started drafting my own corset patterns, which has been really cool because I've always just worked off of a regular store-bought pattern and made some adjustments for corsets, because I do think that some of the standard patterns that are out there, if you look at some of the historical costuming patterns, are pretty good for corsets. But now that I've learned to draft my own, I feel like it's limitless what I can create.
Right, an entire world has opened up. That is so awesome. As you're drafting your patterns, I ask this as from a purely nerdy perspective. Are you like very old school using a cutter's must and all that stuff? Or how are you keeping track of all your pieces and, storing your patterns?
Yeah, right. I have a plethora of manila envelopes that are full of patterns. Most of them are on tracing paper, and that what I realized early on in my design career was labeling is key. Oftentimes I would open an envelope, spill out all the pieces, and not remember what half of them were for. Especially when you're creating facings and collars and cuffs, and you get 30 pieces in front of you, and you're like, oh, I can identify the front bust, I can identify the back panel, and the rest of the stuff I have no idea.
Right. Is this a fly facing or the fly?
Yeah. So now I'm big on, I number my pattern pieces. I label what they are. I'll label whether or not they have seam allowance, because sometimes when I'm working off the block patterns, I may not always draft with a seam allowance on it. And depending on the fabrication, I might want a wider or narrower seam allowance.
Sure, especially if you're fitting.
I won't include it. Yeah, I won't include it on a pattern, and I'll just kind of eyeball it when I'm cutting. But when you lay those patterns back out and you don't tell yourself whether or not you had a seam allowance, then you start to question.
Yeah. Do you usually note that on the pattern, or are you a notcher?
Oh no, I just note it
Oh,
on
okay.
the pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. In school they emphasize the importance of notches, but I think as a home sewer, I've realized the importance of fudging things.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. What are your favorite books or videos or resources that you use to, as your go-to when you need help?
Hmm well, for patterning,
Hmm.
my absolute, like, hands down favorite book, I'm not even sure if it's in print anymore. You can find it online at various places,
Uh-huh.
but I actually pulled it out for us. Metric Pattern Cutting by
Awesome.
Winfred Aldrich
Hmm.
is my absolute favorite. It's full of, great block patterns that you can create, but then tips and tricks if the fitting is not quite perfect, if you're, suffering pull lines or, like cowled dips and stuff, like how to make adjustments in the pattern,
Uh-huh.
which is, just incredible information I didn't necessarily get when I was in school.
Right.
But she also has it for menswear.
Oh, excellent.
I think there's one for children's wear, but
Uh-huh.
I have no need to make kids clothes.
Yeah. I
um,
hopefully will one day be in that boat, but we'll see.
the other book that I love is my Singer's Complete Guide to Sewing, and it's really like sewing for dummies.
Yeah.
But it's all visual. I actually got pages of notes. It's all visual. It's all organized really well,
Uh-huh.
and so it's everything from like how to do a flat felled seam or a front fly
Hmm.
to just sewing on a button or something super elementary.
Yeah.
But I find there's always something that I get hung up on in the process of sewing, and it's a great resource to go back to
Oh,
often.
that's awesome. I feel like more sewing books especially can take notes from that because when there's illustrations rather than actual photographs, it can be really hard to tell what they even are showing you.
Yeah.
Especially depending on the skill of the illustrator, or if there are many different factors that go into this, but a photograph tells so much better, I think, than
Yeah.
especially when it's an instructional something or other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there are some things like a front fly that I don't care how many times I do it or how many times I see it, I still can't. I have to pull apart an existing, pair of pants
Yeah.
to like remind myself of how that actually happens.
Yeah, I can think in my head the steps to do a welt pocket, but every time I get there, I'm like, hold on, let me just make sure before I cut this. What do you want people to know about drag?
Oh yeah. I think what I love about drag is, I hope it does what it does for me is I hope what it does for everyone else. I use, drag is a moment to escape. It's a moment to celebrate
Uh-huh.
differences and who we are, and just sort of take ourselves out of the day-to-day toil and trouble and drama and all that's going on in this world, and
Mhm.
just have fun. Realize that life isn't that serious.
Yes.
Things are not, like at the end of the day, like it's more important to smile and laugh and have fun than put up with half the things we deal with on a regular basis.
Right. So, that being said, what advice do you have for anybody who wants to start getting into it themselves? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I was so fortunate that I started doing it on a whim, and then met the right people and got
Mhm.
connected, and it kind of happened really fast. I would say there are so many resources out there now. You mentioned YouTube earlier. There's so many tutorials. There's so many guides out there. It's definitely worth, if you're interested in it, get out and go see shows, meet some of the performers, talk to people, of course, when it's safe to do so.
Yes.
But network and talk to people, and then start trying it, honing your craft. You'll never get anywhere if you don't actually try it, and identify the fact that it's not going to be good to start. I look back at some of my old pictures and old costumes, and how I had the bravery to step outside of those. Sure. But I did. I think also when you start trying drag, and this goes for anybody, you'll realize how empowering it is.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's something super empowering about putting on a 5-inch stiletto and stomping down the road.
Yeah.
You can't ever take me off of that high,
Yeah.
when I'm in that mode. And I think it's important for people to find things that lift them up and empower them and make them feel good. And sometimes that's clothing. Sometimes that's putting on a new persona.
Yes.
Sometimes that's getting on stage and performing. There's a variety of ways. And I think drag kind of encapsulated all that for me.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that, even just getting ready for, as we were talking about before, a corporate meeting, and you're thinking to yourself, I have to look my best. I'm going to put on a huge eyeliner today because I want everybody to know that they shouldn't be messing with me. Or whatever it is, it's you're creating this look for yourself even in your regular life, and to be able to have the capacity to do that as a drag performer and really create this larger than life character is just, it's so cool.
Yeah, I think drag isn't just me dressing up like Maxie. Drag is exactly what you said. It's deciding what persona you want to take on that day. What message do you have to get across? What fight are you going to have to fight? It's your armor. It's your battle gear. It's what you do, to get that across. And that isn't always who you are. I mean, I think I get ready for work and a big presentation. I might put on a suit. Oh, I hate suits. Like, I couldn't find something stifling to wear. But I know that that's what it's going to take to get that job done, and that's the persona that I'm going to create and wear that day. Right. And for me, that's also drag, just as much as putting on Maxie and going and doing a show is drag.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give somebody who wants to get into sewing their own drag stuff? Is it, again, YouTube tutorials, or would you recommend you pattern everything? But do you ever drape on a form, or, how would you suggest a newbie coming in would get started?
Well, I'm not a draper. I am a flat patterner, but, I learned that through trial and error. And sewing is a skill that you have to build over time. Makeup is a skill that you have to build over time. Rarely can anyone just sit down and, play a concerto on the piano. Like, that takes practice, and all of these things also take practice. And I've made so many mistakes along the way, and you learn so much from every mistake that you make. I've had to re-sew I don't know how many sleeves because I put the right arm on the left armhole.
Isn't that sad when that happens?
I can look at them, I can plan it out, I can be so certain, and then I get done sewing that armhole and I lift it up and the arm's going the wrong way, and I'm like, how? After 20 years of sewing did I do that again?
Yes.
Somebody all the time.
Somebody once told me, once you make that mistake, you'll never make it again. That is not true. No, it really isn't. No.
In fact, that is the one mistake I repeat almost every time I make something.
Right.
I sit down and I'll tell myself, I'm going to get it right this time. I'm going to get it right this time. And I sure as shit, I pull up that pattern and I messed it up again. But, you just have to learn from your mistakes and you have to keep going. So if you're just starting to sew, you're not going to make the perfect garment every time or right away. It takes patience, which I don't always have when I'm sewing either. I'm trying to rush through things.
Yes.
It takes practice, and it takes a little love.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question, I think. What's your favorite material to sew? What's your favorite embellishment technique? Tell me, what is your, ideal world to create?
I listen to Sewing with Threads. Do you listen to that podcast at all?
Yes, it is so endearing.
They ask that question quite often, and everyone's always they always answer, I love sewing with wool. Wool's not a fabric. Wool's a fiber. It makes me crazy when I listen to that. But when I do, if I were to say my absolute favorite thing to sew on, I love a good wool Melton. And it goes back to my roots of loving outerwear.
Yeah.
A pea coat or a coat made of a really high quality wool cashmere blend, like Melton, I absolutely adore. But when it comes to Maxie, I always love the look of sequins.
Yeah.
They are murder to sew on.
Yes.
They're a disaster. They're a mess when you're cutting. They break so many needles. There's so many times I'm afraid my machine's not going to make it through. But I love the look of them though.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. when it comes to embellishment, I mean, nothing beats a Swarovski's crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually glue those on with some E6000.
Uh-huh.
I killed so many brain cells in the process.
Oh, no.
But it's a look that can't be beat.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Is there anything else that you want people to know for now?
I think the thing that I want everyone to keep in mind with everything is that there's so much going on in this world today. There's so many stressors, so many things that can get you fired up or take your head out of the game. For me, I found sewing and drag were two things that helped me escape from the world, helped me walk away, re-energize, recharge, so that tomorrow I can come back and face the day with a new energy.
Yeah.
And I hope that other people can find something like that, whether it be sewing or painting or drawing or, whatever it might be, that, they take that time to find that stuff, so that they can help make the world a better place the next day.
What an excellent sentiment. Thanks so much for this. I really appreciate it. So thank you, and let's plan on talking again next weekend.
Absolutely.
Okay,
all right.
cool.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thanks, Wayne.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.